Good afternoon, and welcome to today's event, Research Points the Way Toward Innovations in Women's Education. I'm Georgia Hall, Interim Executive Director of the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College and Director of the National Institute on Out-of-School Time. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in for this discussion. I understand many of the global governance students from the University of Rome Tor Vergata are here. Special welcome to them. Our program will begin with a moderated discussion panel, followed by a Q&A where we will take questions from the audience. I have a few housekeeping matters related to this webinar that everyone should be aware of. First, to keep things running smoothly, we will disable the chat. We ask that you send all of your questions to using the Q&A feature that you should see at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the program, and that is where you can enter any questions that you have for our panelists. Second, we are recording this program, and the video will be posted on our website for folks who are not able to join us this afternoon. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Wellesley Centers for Women, WCW, we are a research and action institute at Wellesley College. Our mission is to advance gender equality, social justice, and human well-being through high-quality research, theory, and action programs. This year is our 50th anniversary year, and for the past 50 years, we've been focused on shaping a better world for women, girls, families, and communities in all their diversity around the world. Education is a key area of our work, and it has never been more important. The Wellesley Centers for Women has held non-governmental organization special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council for the United Nations since the year 2001. This standing allows WCW to designate official representatives to a wide range of UN meetings held around the globe, including the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. And we're excited that today's program is a parallel event of the 2025 UN Commission on the Status of Women. Women changemakers are using research and innovation to respond to long-standing and emerging challenges in the education of women and girls around the world. During the virtual program, 3 dynamic panelists will share their innovative approaches to support education, equality, and human well-being with the power of data. We'll hear from former WCW Executive Director Susan McGee Bailey about her experience sharing the report How Schools Shortchange Girls at the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. We'll learn about Afghan human rights activist Pashtana Durrani's innovative approach to bring education to girls in Afghanistan who were excluded from school. And we'll discover how human rights attorney Hauwa Ibrahim combines women-led maker technology and local materials to bring STEAM education to thousands of young people in Nigeria. Let me now introduce you to the panelists who will be sharing their expertise with us today. Hauwa Ibrahim is an international human rights and Sharia law attorney with decades of experience representing women and children condemned to death in Sharia courts. She has been honored with awards including the European Parliament 2005 Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought for her efforts on behalf of human rights and freedoms. Hauwa is originally from northern Nigeria and has worked internationally as a visiting professor or fellow at Harvard University, Yale University, and Majlis El Hassan in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the University of Rome, Italy. She is also president of the Peace Institute and author of the best-selling book, Practicing Sharia Law, 7 Strategies for Achieving Justice in Sharia Courts. In 2018, she joined Wellesley Centers for Women as a visiting scholar, and in 2024 became a senior international scholar in residence. She's currently researching and working on Mothers Without Borders, the phenomenology of mothers' soft power in building peace, with groups of women across dozens of countries in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa. Another of her current initiatives is a summer camp program that brings culturally appropriate STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, education to students in dozens of communities throughout Nigeria and other African nations. Pashtana Durrani is an Afghan human rights activist and community development expert who focuses on girls' education. As an international scholar in residence at the Wellesley Centers for Women, she continues in her capacity as a practitioner to develop models that support Afghan women and girls pursuing education and the health of Afghan mothers and infants. Pashtana founded Learn Afghanistan, a grassroots organization established to safely and securely educate girls through a distributed network of tablet computers using an online platform. Through Learn, she has educated 10,000 girls and boys in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and trained more than 80 teachers in digital literacy. Learn also focuses on girls' health and has trained 700 girls in menstrual hygiene management. Through Learn, Pashtana runs 6 underground secret schools. These schools educate 700 girls daily. Pashtana has received awards and recognition for her work from organizations around the world, including the Malala Fund, Amnesty International, the BBC, Time, the Aspen Institute, the United Nations Development Program, and the Muhammad Ali Center. Her memoir, Last to Eat, Last to Learn, was released in 2024, and she is featured regularly on the BBC, CNN, PBS, and more. Susan McGee Bailey was the director of the Wellesley Centers for Women for 25 years, from 1985 to 2010. She graduated from Wellesley College in 1963. In history, disappointed, her course seldom focused on women. An older neighbor had told stories of women's struggle for the vote. Susan planned a career working for equity and equality for women. She earned a PhD from the University of Michigan and completed a postdoc in public health with Johns Hopkins in Bogota, Colombia. Positions including directing Harvard's research office on women and policy work on equitable education in Washington, D.C., led her quarter century as head of WCW. During her tenure as executive director at WCW, in 1992, she co-authored a groundbreaking report called How Schools Shortchange Girls that challenged the assumption that girls and boys are treated equally in U.S. public schools. With support from the Ford Foundation, she attended the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995 and distributed copies of the report in Spanish, French, and Mandarin. The report influenced U.S. federal legislation on programs for girls in science and math and shaped public discourse on gender and education and led to new community-based programs for girls across the country. Thank you to all of these speakers on today's panel. And now let's begin. So Susan, let's start with you. As I mentioned, you were there in 1995. And shared your report on how schools shortchange girls. Can you talk about the experience of being there, the findings of that report, and why it was important to have the data on the ways girls were not being treated equally in United States schools?
Well, first, I'd like to begin by thanking everybody for attending the panel, and especially for my opportunity to join a panel with 2 young women who are doing such important work. As you heard in Georgia's introduction, I've been working on equitable treatment and education for girls and women for a long time. And my first connection with UN international conferences goes all the way back to 1975 in Mexico City, which was the first UN conference. And it was striking to me to arrive in Beijing and see how far we had come in terms of a global gathering. In 1975 in Mexico City, there were about 1,000 official delegates and 1,700 or so people attending the NGO forum. It was a rather disorganized place. I went on my own and just wandered around. I had no official pass, but people loaned me their passes. When people were leaving a seat, I snuck into their seat. And it was very exciting. But I think it's important to remember that that first conference, the focus was just to get women into the conversation about development and to see women as equal partners, although we didn't even use those words, people who deserve to be included in the discussion was more the way it was put. 20 years later, in 1995, when I went to Beijing with Peggy McIntosh, also from the Wellesley Centers, and we both had an opportunity to speak on different aspects of our work. The Ford Foundation funded our participation there, or my participation there, and the AAUW had funded the report itself. It was already a collaborative venture in terms of drawing together foundations, researchers, the people who worked on the report, How Schools Shortchange Girls, a wide variety of experts, people from the centers, people from other universities. We also partnered with the National School Boards Association and the association that represented the state superintendent of education in every state. It was an opportunity to bring together not just all the data on one topic or data on girls, but to look deeply at the data in terms of race, gender, and socioeconomic status, and to look at it in comparison with boys in those different groups as well. I think that bringing it to an international audience thrilled us. We hadn't been sure that my first reaction when the Ford Foundation said, wouldn't you like, we think this should be presented to an international audience was, well, I'm not so sure. I mean, this was a very country specific report, but they convinced me, and I was easy to convince, that the way we had gone about trying to draw in a lot of different constituencies, a lot of different research from different people in different universities, and ask questions that were beyond just one single academic topic, like math and science, which was a very central part of the report, with great deal of help from Pat Campbell, who was my partner in working on that particular chapter. It made a difference. It made a difference because people had been assuming that, well, both boys and girls go to school in the United States, they go to coeducational schools, they get the same education. But we looked at the data in terms of not just subject area differences, but also in terms of the classroom environment, sports and physical education, and a topic that we called the evaded curriculum. What do students learn about their bodies, their feelings, their emotions, and how to handle them? Do they learn anything at all, or do they learn only the gender stereotypes that unfortunately I think are still with us? We did address something that I don't think needs to be addressed these days, called the math gene. There isn't one. But I think that stereotypes about what's for boys and what's for girls are still things that we need to worry about. And I know later we're going to talk about other aspects of our work and what we think was particularly innovative and important. But at this point, the thing I'd most like to emphasize is that we were trying to address assumptions that everyone held that everything was fine. After all, the 1972 law called Title IX, which is now under threat again, guaranteed that any program that received federal funds should be equal for both boys and girls. But it wasn't necessarily being enforced. And it reminded me of my friend, Miss Fulton, that Georgia mentioned, who had said to me one day, I think I was probably in the 7th or 8th grade when the 1954 Supreme Court decision said public schools cannot be sex could not be race separated. And I was very excited because our teacher told us this was a very important thing. And Miss Fulton said to me, well, child, you'll learn. You can't change something just by passing a law. It's much more complicated than that. And I think that's what all of us have found. And we have learned that we have to work with a much wider constituency.
Thank you so much,
I'll
Susan.
stop here.
Thank you. Hauwa and Pashtana, can you each give us a brief overview of the work you do and what led you to it? We'll start with Hauwa.
What a pleasure to be with all of you. And I am so blessed and honored to be with Susan in this panel, and of course, Pashtana. I came into girls' education, or generally education for children, from a perspective of where I came from. So I myself was educated by accident. I became a lawyer by accident. I went to teach at Harvard by accident and taught at Oxford University in the United Kingdom by accident. So I always found myself in this accidental mix of my journey, that the best way to give is to give back what I had been given. And so even though my vocation is low, I choose to go back to the classroom, to elementary school, to high school, to sit down in class and learn subject related to what was mentioned here on science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I wanted to give an alternative to the region where I come from. And I may make a caveat here. I come from northern Nigeria, but Nigeria itself, you have a lot of well-educated women. In the north, during my time, it wasn't so much. The situation has not changed as much. The country has over 250 million people. And so I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm just speaking about my work. So I decided to go back home and to see where there is need. And that is where we started the STEAM camps. Now, STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I was blessed to be in Rome at the University of Rome Tor Vergata the past 11 years, now 12. And I had students, and some of them are on the Zoom call, as recognized by Georgia, that have decided to say we'll leave our comfort zone and come with you to see what we can add value to humanity. And so over the past 5 years, we've gone back with students from the University of Rome and a professor from Wellesley College here, actually from WCW, Lashanda, and we were able to give back to children between the ages of 15, 10 to 15, and sometimes 17, those subject matter education. I think later we'll speak a little bit about what we do in details, but for me, I came into the entire concept of girls' education from my own background. Thank you.
I think I'm gonna go next. Please excuse me. I am in school and I'm wearing a mask because I had a dental surgery and it went a little AWOL, so a little of my face is swollen. So my apologies for that. But overall overview. So I'm Pashtana, a social and political rights activist. I come from Afghanistan. I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Pakistan. As Hauwa said, her focus, she became an accidental educator. Mine was actually very much focused on me being born in the house of educators and then raised in between educators and then becoming an educator. So when I was born and raised, my family ran a school in the refugee camp for girls. And that school was for almost 70 girls, and they would get educated on daily basis. And I hated every minute of it. I was like, why am I part of this? Why how do I have to be part of this? But over the course of those years, I realized that part of our conduct is that we have to be responsible for our community. We have to be part of our community. If we have a privilege, we have to share that. And my family's privilege was that all of them were educated. All of them were educated. They went to universities, and my aunt went to university. So she was a woman who was educated who could teach young girls. Um, when I became of the age and I went to Afghanistan, I didn't necessarily want to work in education. But the first time I met my own cousin, she couldn't access education. And that's where I realized, okay, education is important and maybe we need to look at it through the lens of technology. Fast forward to 2025 now, we have almost 6 million users or learners through a radio program. We have 2 million learners through our SIM card program. We have 700 girls in person who learn from grade 7 to grade 12. That, by the way, in Afghanistan is banned because of the current regime. Girls cannot learn beyond grade 6. So the 700 girls get education from grade 7 to grade 12 in underground schools. And then apart from that, we invest in technologies that is going to make sure that learning and education is beyond brick and mortar. And it is not held hostage by governments, regime, and men altogether. So far, the work that we do only focuses on girls who are unable to access from grade 7 to grade 12 or age 13 to 18. A little overview about Afghanistan. Afghanistan never was the country that is being represented in the world right now, that Afghanistan never educates their girls or the culture of Afghanistan is something different. Here's a fun fact about Afghanistan. 120 years ago, when people in the West didn't allow women to vote, Afghanistan was, by the way, one of the first countries that recognized women as equals and gave them the right to vote in the constitution. So we had an equal constitutional article, which was article number 7, which said men and women of Afghanistan are equal. It doesn't matter what ethnicity you come from, what gender you are. If you're a citizen of Afghanistan, you're equal. And the second fun fact is 120 years ago from now, the Queen of Afghanistan was the first woman who actually became the woman of a minister of education. And she sent women on these education mission to Syria, to Turkey, to India. And they educated women all around Afghanistan and sent them on these missions. So when I talk about Afghanistan, I get super excited, but I also wanted to make sure that I give this overview. The legacy that I carry within me is the legacy of all these women who came before me, who sacrificed a lot and who educated a lot. My aunt, the Queen of Afghanistan, and all those women who went on all these serious missions to just get educated, come back to their country and get educated. And we continue to carry that forward. All those 700 girls who show up to our schools are these amazing, brave girls who still show up in a country which says that it's illegal to learn. All those teachers that are told that it's illegal to teach still show up to those schools and teach. So my overview of my work is it's a little dangerous, a little fun, but very rewarding. Thank you.
So I'm struck, Hauwa and Pashtana, with the very creative and innovative ways you've chosen to do this work to educate girls. And I wondered if you could say more about that, starting with Pashtana, about how your approach is innovative and what inspired you, towards that approach.
Thank you, Georgia, for that question. So for me, I think the focus is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to be a one-stop shop for everyone. But we definitely want to be a hub for young girls and educators where they feel safe, where they can be innovative, where they can invest in technology. So for example, the radio program that we run is not something that we invented. We have a lot of content. Radio program heard about us. They came to us and they were like, hey, we want to partner up with you. And we're like, okay, but what is your approach? And they're like, okay, we have these many people. And here's the fun part. Today, through that radio program, which is 1 hour in both languages of Afghanistan, Dari and Pashto, and it focuses on STEM, which is, again, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and feminist literature, by the way, my favorite subject. And that focuses on almost 6 million users in 34 provinces of Afghanistan, the refugee areas in Iran and Pakistan. which a lot of INGOs cannot focus on, but we do. Here's the fun story that I always tell is, so we have a hotline on this radio. Every time someone listens to the lesson, they reach out to us and they have a question about it. This one time, the grandfather reached out to us and he's like, my granddaughter doesn't understand what you said in this lesson. Can you explain this further? And I found it so fascinating that through this radio program, we're not educating just girls or teachers or both. We're educating a whole society, a whole environment around girl. And how amazing is that? And I'm so grateful that we were able to do that, you know. So there are brothers who do that, or fathers who listen to this program, and they make sure that the girl listens to it or they record it in some way, you know. The second approach we have is the SIM card program, right? So for example, the SIM card program, if you're anywhere in Afghanistan and you use the SIM card, you'll get a message from us which says, are you interested in something from grade 7 to grade 12? And if you're interested, you'll click on it. You don't need internet. You don't need any more money in your SIM card. All you need to be the user of it. And you can access anything and everything from grade 7 to grade 12 in both languages at the touch of your button on your screen. And how amazing is that? And then we have these online and in-person classes. And here's the one fun story that I really want to share is, so we have this robotics and AI class that we teach, but the teacher is available in the evening. And it's almost like, 20 girls. And I was talking to him, I was like, so what are the updates? And he's like, here's the fun part. The father of the girls, they charge their cell phones, they get internet on those cell phones. And then when it's time, they call me and they're like, hey, the daughter is getting connected with you just in a moment. And then they give the cell phone to their daughters. Look at the amazing resource sharing and ensuring that their girls have access to that sort of learning. We have in-person classes, as I said, for the 700 girls. Most of the time when these girls are taking exams, which is in person, the fathers actually take time to take rounds for security so that the Taliban don't check in on these places. So for me, I think it's not just like using radio or reusing a SIM card program or showing up in person or using robotics or AI. It's more about how do you form the society and community and this trust within, and then use these different approaches to ensure that access is always there, that you can access to that education. And again, like I go back to my first, what I said was, we need to democratize education for women and young girls. And the only way to do is to use all the resources we have. So trust building with parents, investing in SIM cards, investing in radio programs, investing in anything and everything that is going to make it accessible, usable, user-friendly, and also accessible to parents who can just pick up a phone and call you, All of those are the approaches that we take at Learn to ensure that girls stay in school and get educated. But thank you.
I think you, Pashtana, you sort of just hit it, the issue of education when it comes to what you rounded up with accessibility and how to be inclusive of parents. What I'm very fascinated about is the first time I'm hearing over 100 years ago, the women in Afghanistan had the right to vote. So that was very powerful. My innovative approach is sort of more totally rudimental. So I started from hawking, and I mentioned how I accidentally became educated. So I was selling things on my head in my village from house to house, and from hawking to Harvard as a professor. The past 7 years, I am reviewing application of professors coming to Harvard. So the professor. So from hawking to this where I am, it's a long walk. And so the point of contact to a lot of girls and a lot of children is, if I can be, then you can be better. That is our slogan. They can be better than where I am. And I think all of us in this webinar owe the duty to give it back in terms of they can be better than us. So my innovation is around this, they can be better than me. And just to mention just a few, I have published 7 books. And like you hear, English is my 5th language. And this is one of my books that was published last year at the end. This was also a book that was published. I have the 3 of the books here with me. Now, if English is my 5th language and I can still do what I'm doing, it means they can do better. So, but how do we practicalize being better? So that is where the community comes in. And if the community owns what we are doing, we are agents of good, but the community should own it. So 3 things I want to make about innovation. It is contextual. It depends on where you're operating in, what you are doing. In our own, the communities we work with are in rural areas. And we go to schools where if you have a phone, there is a class structure, maybe you are not people we are looking for. We are looking for the voiceless, for the powerless, for the poor, and for the illiterate. And it is happening right now that we still have these communities in where I come from. But let me go back a little bit and pivot back to what Pashtana said about radio. I came to Harvard in 2008, and I'm still hanging around Harvard, doing things for them. But the issue was, I saw where I was coming from. I saw the need to do something. And so I thought maybe one person that is extremely powerful to make things happen that I can't is the Sultan of Sokoto. He has over 150 million people that listen to him, not only in northern Nigeria, but across West Africa and beyond. So I thought, why not bring him to Harvard? And let us give him a microphone. And let us put around him girl-child education. And then he came very graciously in 2010. He spoke very well about girls' child education. When they were writing his speech, we put a line in that speech about the need for girls to go to school, because all of us in some communities at the age of 11, 12 who are given out in marriage. And so we cannot say it as women or as members of the society that nobody will listen to us as much, but they may listen to the Sultan. So we put that statement in his speech. And then we lifted that statement and took it back to Nigeria and went to the Sultan's, the Caliphate Council, and asked them that this is what the Sultan said in his speech. Can we use it as a jingle in the radio so that we encourage parents in the villages to send their children to school? That was 2010, 2011. And reporting back and reflecting back, I can tell you that was a magic. It worked. So in our context, we saw what was useful and how the communities will respond to things like this. And we are innovating in different ways. We have used the STEM project to continue building of what the Sultan has said. We have used local leaders, and I'm sure we are going to talk about it in a moment. But I want to assure everybody that is now listening to all of us here that we are coming from different angles, the speakers, but some of you are even much more vast in what you do, but we have the power of one. But the power of togetherness is even stronger. And I hope that is the message we are going to give today, that we all have it within us to innovate, to create, to make the society a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Hauwa. Very truly creative, innovative, and magical. So innovation in education can happen in many different ways. And sometimes it's technological, and sometimes it's a new way of approaching a subject or of gathering data. And Susan, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how your report, How Schools Shortchange Girls, was also innovative. And if you were to do that study again today, would you do anything differently or in addition to what you did then?
Yes, I would. But first, I'd like to say how much I agree with Hauwa's perspective that it's not an individual thing. It needs to be people working together. And the sign I still have here in my office at home, and that I had in my office at the Wellesley Centers for 25 years, said, "None of us are as smart as all of us." And I really think that And it appears to me that often women are much more amenable and inclined to learn from others and enjoy the process of being part of a community and a group and helping to grow those. So we're in total alignment on that view. The 1995 meetings were very special in the sense not only that they were many times larger, 1,700 delegates compared to 1,000 in 1975, but 37,000 or more people at the NGO meetings. And out of those meetings came the sense that women's rights, as Hillary Clinton so eloquently framed it, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And I think that if I were to do the report again, I would try to put much more emphasis on civic education and on including women's history and women's struggle for the vote and what women around the world have done and how they've done it in innovative, various ways. But I think we have so much to learn from women in other countries to follow examples. I know I came back from Beijing. We had included the issue of sexual harassment in How Schools Shortchange Girls, which was also a new topic in the sense that people weren't paying very much attention to it at all. But I got great encouragement by talking with the one person that I could find who had done any research on it, and including as much of her research as possible, Nan Stein. And when I came back from Beijing, we decided we have to start a specific project on this. And we raised money. We didn't know much about it then. We wrote to everybody who had been a contributor to the center and asked, said if you each just sent $10, we'd be able to fund her work. And we got a very surprising response because we got letters that said, I wish I could contribute more, but here's $2. And we got responses from women who have significant means who said, really, you need more than $10 a person, and they helped fund it. I think that we always need to keep in mind that perhaps the most important questions we ask and research are those that lead to the next question. And we've made progress, but we also at this point are in a very difficult worldwide situation in which misogyny and disrespect and non-inclusion of women is growing in some places rather than receding. The battle is never over, but I do remember, as you also referenced, how long it sometimes takes to win rights. And it took a very long time in the United States before women had the vote. They just kept at it, and we need to keep at it too.
Thank you so much, Susan. Hauwa and Pashtana, it's clear that you, one, must consider the culture, the leadership, and the attitudes of the local communities that you serve. I wondered how you describe how you build strong relationships with community leaders to ensure your work has maximum impact. And Hauwa, I'd love to start with you.
So I wanted to mention that 80% of what we do with STEAM, the materials that we use for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics are in the trash of the communities we work with. So I just wanted to make sure that that gets in. And we insist with our pupils that they don't need to go to the next town to be who they are created to be. They can do it right here. So we use trash such as water bottle, the 75 liters or 50 liters, and the cover of the bottles. and stick from the tree, and we create a moving vehicle, and we say, this is the balloon-powered car, but this is just the beginning for you to start thinking, because we want your village to create the first car in Nigeria. And they get so excited. You can talk about the robotic hands. Right behind some of the classes, we had clay mold. So we use the clay to make pots and kitchen utensils. And so I just want to make sure that that is understood, that 80% of our materials are locally sourced. Now, to the question of how we work with tradition leaders, opinion leaders, religious leaders is extremely important for 3 reasons. The first is they are the custodian of the tradition. They are the custodian of the villages and the cultures, and the nuances are known to them. Now, if we come with our ideas, we want to teach them, we don't get it always right. So in my work in not only Northern Nigeria, but across other jurisdictions, is that let's go there knowing they know better than we do. And we have some ideas, but own it, it is yours. And usually we do it behind the closed doors. And when they are the front of the ideas we have, it's sustained. And I'll give you an example with a computer I took home. In the late 1990s, we still have the computer right now there. So we took the computer to my village. They've never had the word computer. They don't have electricity. They don't have nothing. So I want to give the computer, and they said, okay, but what is it? And it was explained to them what a computer is. And okay, so how do we use it? We use it with electricity. But before I brought in, I said, I need you to talk with me about it, whether it's something you want to see, whether it's something you want to keep, and how do you intend to maintain it? People raise their hands here and there at the chief council in the village. Oh, we are going to build a home with mud, with clay. We are going to build a home to keep the computer. Some people know I'm going to be the megad so that nobody come close to that. Getting to 20 plus years after getting to that, we still have that computer in that space. They own it. It was theirs. Nobody touched it. And even though we have moved on from that to other things in the village, but that was a special thing that I remember, how working with those people sustain whatever ideas we want to give them. And I want to mention quickly about the soft power. We all have different approaches, and there is no right or wrong approach. And so I personally enjoy the soft power. And the soft power is an approach that, for me, when you play behind the scene and not owning your intellectual property, you see the progress faster. So we leave our STEAM camps curriculum. We never had a STEAM camp curriculum for the most part. We leave what we have and go and innovate another one. And so I have spoken a little bit about the soft power of the mothers, specifically the phenomenology of that soft power, but I won't go into it here. I just want to quickly mention that in each culture, there is nuances, and we have to understand them and try to work within them and give them the tools to own and run the initiatives that we bring. And I want to quickly round up here by mentioning the equity in education, which I think the question will come, I hope. But that we focus on girls' child education, which is fantastic. But we can't only focus on that without the boys' child because they live in a community. So we have tilted into just education for all with an emphasis on the girl child. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hauwa, for that approach. And I think one thing I look up to Hauwa is, like, when I came to WCW, Hauwa had a very different approach, a very democratized approach, I would say, towards intellectual property, but also towards STEM education within STEAM education, excuse me, Hauwa, within the global South. I think for me, when I look at uh, approaching communities, but also relationships building, I don't want to deny that I do have a certain privilege given I come from a tribal region and my father was a tribal leader. Now, normally, when you're a tribal leader, the daughter doesn't get a lot of influence. She's married off at age 16, and I should have had kids by now, by the way. But the fun thing happened is my father used his influence to further my influence. So I was the first woman within my own tribe to show her face in the past 300 years. I was also the first woman who was openly sitting within those tribal spaces where decisions were made about women. So, for example, if I was a woman getting a divorce, if it was a woman who was standing a trial on honor, if it was a woman who was standing a trial on whatsoever, I was part of those spaces. The one thing I learned from my father was he was a big, big feminist. He was raised by a feminist mother, he was raised by a feminist sister. And during his time as a tribal chief, the one thing he did, and I'm always going to be proud of it and carry it with me, is in his 30 years of being a tribal chief, not a single woman was wedded for money and dowry. As a young child bride, not a single woman was murdered for honor killing. Not a single woman who asked for divorce was not given a divorce. So whenever a woman came for divorce, which is such a bad thing in our part of the world, she was always given access and the right to get a divorce first without having to pressurize a man. And not a single woman was violated of her rights when she asked for it. And I always used to question it. I was like, why did he do that? What was the reason? What was the reason that a man that almost 100,000 households listen to still takes time and connects with his poor cousin from the district that comes once a year and talks about domestic violence with his cousin's daughter who's going through it and how he can solve it? And I used to ask him, I was like, why do you have so much time? Like, what makes you do all of this? And he used to tell me, our responsibility is our community. And it didn't come from a place of savior complex. No, it came from a place where we all felt that. If a girl was going through domestic violence, we all felt that. If a girl was going through an honor shaming, we all felt that. If a woman was abused, if a woman was violated of her rights, we all felt that. And the best thing he was approaching it towards, he would listen to the women, he would listen to the men, and he would calmly make a decision. And then, even if the decision was harsh on men, the men would still accept it because they knew that he's not an unfair man. So when he passed away and I got to carry the mantle, I embodied three of his qualities. I listen a lot to other people when I speak about education, human rights, women rights. Why do girls need to be in school? I listen to men who don't believe that girls should be in school. I listen to people who are like, this may not be something we are interested in. And then I understand, how do I approach this with them? I don't tend to force them on, oh no, you need to meet me here where I am a master's Harvard graduate student and work at Wellesley Center. I meet them where they are. If you're in Dund, in a district in Kandahar where you haven't seen the outside, and you have genuine questions on how a girl should be in school and why a girl should be in school, I will respond to you within that context, which is our religion says that, our culture says this, and our history says this. And we should all be approaching it towards that lens. And there is a lot of respect for religion, culture, but also the women, the feminist history of Afghanistan. We can meet any man, but you can never deny a feminist history of Afghanistan, which is like 3,000 years old, by the way. So for me, I approach it through those lenses. Apart from that, I think my focus is relationship building. So for example, people who work with me, I care about them. I care about them. If my assistant partner, his wife is pregnant, I care about her. I care about them. So I ask them questions and I would be very interested in how I can make their life better. The same goes for everything else in my life. If the students who come up to my class, their father has a question or concern, their mother has a question or concern, I would like to address it as genuinely as possible. The same goes for my community. If there's a problem, I would rather not approach it with a calculated answer, which normally happens in politics. I would rather answer it through an approach that is going to bring them a solution. So I think approaching it with humanity, approaching it with empathy, but making sure you're fair and just within that approach, sets boundaries for your community, sets values and beliefs for your community. And that's how you basically earn that. And last but not the least, that's one of the reasons, by the way, I am a ethnically Pashtun who comes from Kandahar, the south. But we run schools in Bamyan, which is ethnically Hazara, a different minority group, a different ethnicity. But they reached out to us because they know I have a very good rapport, a very good standing in my own community, and they believe with their daughters in their community. The same happens for girls in the Samangan. The same happens for girls in Herat. The communities, when they hear of you, when they believe in you, and when they believe in what you have done for your community, they start believing in you. So even if you're not their leader, they will still trust you with your daughters. They will still trust you with their teachers. And I think that approach, that trust earning is hard, but once you have it, the countries and communities are going to move mountains for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pashtana. It's very clear that education is a key pathway to gender equality. And I wondered, actually, starting with you, Pashtana, how do you each see the role of education in shaping a better world?
I think for me, my country right now is going through gender apartheid, and people don't believe it. My country has been, the regime in my country has been at war with teenage girls for the past 25 years, and they believe that they can win this war. But the reality is we're in 21st century, and we're a poor country. So for us to stand on both our feet, we need young girls in school. For us to, for our economy to develop, we need young girls in school because they're going to be the ones bringing in all that innovation and technology. That's all the economy side of it. But apart from that, I also come from a country that the healthcare has collapsed, the education has collapsed. More than 70% of our people go to neighboring countries just for regular problems, regular healthcare issues. If we don't meet those demands, our country is going to be a black hole for one gender and one gender specifically, and we will have gender immigration into these two countries, Iran and Pakistan. So education doesn't only solve an economy problem, it is going to solve a social problem, it's going to solve a healthcare problem, it's going to solve an overall containing and preserving of the society that we have had for the past 3,000 to 5,000 years. It's going to preserve all of that. And I think for that, young girls need to be in school. They need to know that, oh, their ancestors were actually amazing queens who were Minister of Education, who ensured that girls all around the world go to school. So I think it's not just, I don't want to give a philosophical answer like, because it's their right. Of course, it's a fundamental right, but we need to build our community. We need to build our countries. We need to be in the 21st century. We need to play catch up. And for us to do that, the only way through it is through education, through STEM, through ensuring that education becomes accessible, and then it creates opportunities, and those opportunities develop the nation. And those nations are led by women because we are so good at leadership. So why not?
Thank you, Pashtana. And Hauwa, I'd love to hear your perspective on that also.
I would say two quick things because I was looking at the time and I know there's Q&A. The first thing I wanted to say is education is the oxygen of a society. Now, if you remove that oxygen, it's not good enough. So, but I'm looking at education not only from books. I'm looking at education from what I saw in the villages where I grew up and what I continue to see, that there is no one way to say you want to educate a man, a girl, or a child, or a boy, or a woman. There are multiple ways to look at education. And so we should interrogate that word and try to fit it in within the communities on which we work. So for example, I see education in going to a small village, and I just came back from Nigeria some few hours ago, and I will sit down and the children will tell me all the name of the birds or that is passing by. And who knows that? You know, you think this children coming from a village, I have no idea. Education is the passing out on of skills. Like we have the goldsmith in the village, we have the cow rearers, we have the chicken rearers in the house. I went to a fish farm. They don't have they don't go to school, but this is, so for me, education is encompassing of a lot of things. And from this perspective, because we are researchers, our education, like I mentioned, my scholarship, I can only see that being effective if I take it back on the field and it's able to benefit the people. So as we think through this together, even in Q&A, I just want to leave this with us all, that it also entails radical imagination in the context at which we operate. And I'm sure you all have it. We are just mentioning it just to underscore what you have. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Hauwa. And Susan, I'd like to pose that question out to you also.
And the question was, why does education matter?
Yeah, and that it clearly plays a role in equity. And how do you see that role of education shaping a better world?
Well, I think that education can be a two-edged sword, because if the education that children receive perpetuates traditional stereotypes and roles and gives boys a sense of superiority and girls the sense that, you know, some things aren't for them. And I'm old enough to have grown up in a time when I learned that, you know, my dad wanted me to be a scientist. He thought it would be great because there weren't very many women scientists and I'd stand out. And I loved my science classes, but I had learned that science was not for girls. You can do well in it in school, but the scientist was a crazy man in a white coat and wild hair or something. I worry these days about how the pushback against eliminating gender stereotypes may seep back into the school, may seep out of the schools and back into it will come more stereotypical roles, which I think holds women and men back. I think we both need to learn from each other. I think whether you are studying only with girls or only with boys or together, you still need to learn about the skills that are considered masculine and the skills that are considered feminine. And those kinds of skills and values are still dangerously close to coming back into full force in education and in this country, in my country at least. So I think we need to ensure that everyone gets an education in which all kinds of opportunities are open to them, no matter what their social class or racial background or gender is. And it's a bit discouraging now to think how we have to step back a bit and start again on some of these things. But we have to, because otherwise we end up with a society in which some people are very well educated and other people are missing even basic rudimentary skills. And the data is what shows that. And if you don't have the data, going back to research, if you haven't done some research and you haven't collected some numbers, then people can say no data, no problem. And I think we have to keep underlining what the problems are so that we can improve the education for all our students.
Thank you for those words, Susan, and I appreciate the model that you described of the two-edged sword, as I hadn't had that in my head and hadn't thought about that before. So I'd like our audience who are listening to really leave with something tangible, way that they can learn from the work and make change within their own local communities. So I know we want to save time for Q&A, so maybe we just have a few minutes to talk about this, but I wondered for each of you, starting with Susan, if you can offer some tangible way, some takeaways that folks on this presentation can use in a way to make local change.
Okay, I have some ideas that my friend Pat Campbell that I mentioned before shared some of her thoughts with me, and I have some of my own. But I think there are two things to keep in mind. We all have a contribution that we can make. We can all help in some way or another. And as Pat sent me an email reminding me, we have to think individually about what skills and services can we offer. Can we volunteer to teach? Can we volunteer to raise money for programs? Can we volunteer to do small research projects? Schools in every part of the world need all the help they can get. And I think that sometimes people forget that there are things, small things or bigger things that they can do to help. I think also that we have to stop thinking, oh, it's just so small, it won't make a difference. Everything makes a difference. Everybody doing even the small things that they think are all they can manage at the moment, it does make a difference. And I think also we never know, as any of us who have taught children know, you never know when one small thing that you help them with or one small comment that you make may stick with them and make a great deal of difference. And if we keep that always in mind, I think it adds up and is important.
Thank you, Susan. Hauwa, would you like to add to that?
So Susan, it is absolutely right. We can't do it together. We can't do it alone. And when we do it together, we are stronger. We achieve much more. I think you made a sentence in one of our meetings. When you go alone, you go that far. When you go together, you go much, much farther. Let me say some couple of things quickly. Community, as Susan has said, is absolutely necessary. It's very easy to get lost by ourselves, but when we are together in a community, 2, 3 more, I think we will be able to sort of scale through some difficulties together, especially when it comes to our subject matter of today, which has to do with the research points, the way forward toward innovative education for women. Together, we can reach higher heights. I want to suggest citizen assemblies. And recently I was reading something in Taiwan. And so the Taiwan Minister for Innovation and AI, this is becoming an existential threat, as we have known. It's not a topic for today, but this is coming home very closely, and the truth is becoming blurred. So when we are together in a community, when there is a lot of fear factor, a lot of discouragement, we can do it. Together in a community, we should be able, in the citizen assembly, as she was suggesting, and I encourage us to look at Taiwan, the Minister for Digital Economy and Education. I think she has something very important to add to the value of togetherness. The third thing I want to say, interrogating our source of information, I mentioned quickly that we have challenges all over the world, and we have some right here with us. And challenges are meant to be met, and we have the capacity to meet them. We have the challenges of the media, and that has affected education to a large extent, especially girls' education in some of our communities. So we have those issues I'll mention for us to consider: manipulation, control, profit, which is embedded in a lot of what we do online and at times offline. And so where we could separate offline and online and emphasize more of the ability to think, to allow the children to think, to reason. I think it's extremely important that I close with this. We should not allow our reason to be unreasonable, and we should try as much as possible when we think about the future of education to overcome it with going back to the basis, becoming more into our element, what we used to be, some of us from the villages, and those are doing a lot of research. Not take it the 2-minute attention span as we see it now online, but dig deeper. We are stronger. We are tougher together. And I believe that we are just about to start our journey. We cannot afford to sit down still. We can't afford to crawl. We can't afford to walk. I think it's time for us to start thinking of ideas to fly with. And we heard from Susan and from Pashtana. We all have it in us to go further together.
Thank you, Hauwa. And Pashtana, I want to open that last question to you also, which is tangible things that folks can do within their own communities.
Thank you, Georgia, for that. I think I would like to suggest a few suggestions is young people all over the world, especially young women, they need to first focus on the fact that be more involved in politics. Ask your senator questions, ask your congresspeople questions. If they, for example, like right now, whatever is happening in Afghanistan, the US funded education development in Afghanistan for over 20 years. The best thing you could do is pick up that phone, call your representative and ask them, all my taxpayer money went into that country. And now that country's regime that you're still funding is not letting girls go to school. What are you doing about it? That's the first thing you could do, you know. Apart from that, there are a lot of organizations who are doing amazing things. So hear their work, volunteer at those. So for example, at the organization that we work with, more than 12 people from California are right now volunteering with us and are teaching English as a second language in Afghanistan. And people from London are teaching journalism in Afghanistan. So if you have a skill that you think could make a difference in somebody's life, volunteer your time if you don't have any other resources. Apart from that, share their work. Sometimes you don't know who in your network has some sort of influence, and that could really work out for you or for the people that are really focusing on that issue. If you have a cause, share, donate, volunteer are the three things I think you should always be doing, or doing one of those. But apart from that, given that now I live in the US, young women need to believe that their existence is made political and politicized in many ways, and they need to believe in their own political power. They need to educate themselves on their political rights, and then they need to stand up for those. And it may take time. There's a lot of approaches that can be taken, but the best way is you're a voting person. You vote. Your vote is your power. So making sure that wherever your vote goes, you get to ask that question from your representatives. You get to sign those petitions. You get to rally. I mean, like I was talking to, we were all talking to Susan, and she was like, she's going to go out and protest. And I was like, how amazing is that? You having the right to protest is a privilege for a lot of people in the world. Women in my country cannot do that. So if you have that right, practice it. So the right to vote, the right to assembly, the right to go out, practice, and the right to ask your representatives are tangible things that you could do in today's political landscape. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. I just want to remind folks who are listening that if you'd like to post something in the Q&A, we're open to receive that. I know that there are some comments and some questions in those comments, so I'm going to do my best to to get us through some have much in the comments. So let me start with this one. These days, I think that we need to focus more on fundamental values that will strengthen equity, things such as generosity, peace, community, kindness, respect for all, and for respect for the earth and nature, to name a few. Do you feel that this is the province of formal education? And if so, how would you operationalize it? It's a big question, but let me put that out there and see who might want to jump in on that.
I'll say just 2 sentences. I think more attention and consideration and role modeling of these values does need to be part of the everyday life, school life of children. But I don't think that it can only happen in schools. I think it can happen in religious organizations, in out-of-school programs. Georgia, you probably have something to say about that. And in the family. It belongs everywhere. Our culture, in this country at least, is sadly lacking, in my view, in all of the issues and values and attitudes that were mentioned in the question.
Thank you. Pashtana, Hauwa, would you like to add to that at all?
Pashtana? Okay, I just want to add a couple of things. When I was growing up, I grew up in a village, and my grandparents told me a lot of stories. Part of the stories they will tell me is how a bird will sing, they will sing song of wisdom. So the story is told in such a way that is filled with wisdom, is filled with knowledge, and it filled with trust, honesty, all the values you mentioned, the values of truth with a capital T, the value of hard work, the value of respect, and never taking no for an answer. But it's told from a lens of items I can relate to: the chicken in the house, the goats that we take for herding, the cows, the birds. And growing up, like I said, I had no any good education in a way, but I was grounded. And we can only be grounded when we have the right values. So I want to encourage us listening now and beyond that we have to give what we have. So at times, if we don't have, we cannot give our emptiness. And we have to go back to the basis of who we are, slow down on this social media that is consuming us with our spy in our pocket, our cell phone. We need it, but it shouldn't overtake our science, our sense of reason. We have to go back to who we are, who our basis is, so that we can pass it on to our children. Hollywood is great, but we are discovering that maybe it has its own agenda. Please, those values you mentioned, I really admire you putting it as a first question or comment. And I really think we should all be grounded in it so that we can pass it on.
Thank you, Hauwa. Pashtana, I have two questions for you, and one comes from a younger listener, and I'm just so impressed that we have this question from this younger listener, and so I want to give you a moment just to address it. And this listener is asking, I would like to ask, why is Afghanistan now not allowing women their rights if 120 years ago they were considered equal, and what has transpired to change that?
I was very eager to answer that question. I kept on looking at it and I was like, I really want to answer that. I think, as I said, women's existence has been politicized for the longest I can remember. And I mean, let me be honest with you. My own country has banned my existence, my education. I have stood a trial in absentia, and whatever I do right now is illegal in my country, but also the same country that I'm here now. In the next week, there will be a ban on travel. So maybe by next week, I won't be able to leave this country to do whatever I do because I'm a Muslim woman. So the reason I'm bringing this example is countries at some point are going to be hostile towards women. It's just reality. You just don't know the degree of hostility towards women at certain times. Now, going back to my country, 120 years ago, the king and the queen believed in a better education, and the king was in love with the queen, and he believed that he would impress her with all these constitutional approaches. But on a serious note, in the 80s, Afghanistan was infiltrated by misogynist, patriarchal propaganda through books, through education, by the way. And that was taught to young boys over and over and over again. Like, you need to die for your country. You need to murder infidels. You need to protect your women from Russian invaders. And that created a sense of chaos. That created a sense of insecurity. And that's the people who were born in the 80s, our fathers now, are people in power right now, and they're the ones who are running my country. So it's not, I would say it's not the value that has been shifted. It's the approach towards education that was shifted. 120 years ago, we thought that the citizen of Afghanistan was equal. In the 80s, we thought that the men of Afghanistan need to protect the women of Afghanistan, or else they will run away with infidels. And that sort of conditioned this new approach. And today, there is a new way where men think that, where 70,000 men think that women shouldn't be in schools at all. So I think, again, I'm going to go back to our existence is political. So we need to engage politically. We need to address these things politically, and we need to assemble protest, question this politically, and then again, correct these timelines. If that happened in the 80s, today's education and curriculum shouldn't exist of the same things that existed in the 80s, but they still do. And that's what I'm challenging right now. And that's what maybe my children will challenge. And hopefully by my grandchildren's time, we don't have to challenge it anymore. And people will go back to 120 years ago where citizens of Afghanistan were open to education and were equal.
Thank you, Pashtana. I'm going to combine two of the questions that we have because I think they are on the same pathway. And Susan, I'll throw this out to you first. And the first one, talking about while women's education is undeniably crucial, I do not believe that the path to gender equality relies solely on ensuring access to education for women. In fact, there's a need to discuss whether women should have access to education highlights the existing gender inequality. Even the need to talk about that highlights that inequality. So the person is asking, shouldn't our approach to gender equality also focus on educating men and dismantling the male-dominated systems that perpetuate those inequalities? And I want to add to that another comment that was reflecting on Pashtana's comment about her dad being a feminist and, talking about that influence, et cetera. So I'm sorry, I'm just looking to find that question again. But let's start with that notion, Susan, and your thoughts on that, having done the Shortchange Girls book, et cetera, and research.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, women can't change the world alone. Men can't improve the world alone. Men and women have to work together, and learning to work together and learning to value the skills that and the values and the attitudes that men and women bring to things is very important. I, for the most part, think that the more we can educate boys and girls together and give them equal recognition and equal encouragement to be the best little person that they can be, it gives them a head start on growing up to be those kinds of people. It is also true that we have to struggle with the entire society, and that education and schools are only one part of it. And I couldn't possibly agree any more than many 1,000% with Pashtana's plea for women and girls to think of themselves as people who can have power and can influence policy and need to be involved in political action. Because waiting for somebody else, thinking it isn't something a woman should do, is going to get us and has gotten us in too much trouble. We're mobilizing again, but we need to keep the pressure up in every aspect of our society, whether it's the church, the politics, the family. The declaration from the 1995 UN conference was clear. It needs to be equality in every sphere of life, and we need to find every entry point that we can.
Thank you, Susan. And Pashtana, the other comment mentioned that you had mentioned your father was a feminist and raised by feminists. How do you feel we could encourage young men and boys to understand the importance of supporting the feminist movement and that it supports us all?
Love that question because, of course, my father was raised by feminists, but then I raised my brother and he's a big feminist. And so I have a lot of tools for that. And I think the one value that Susan and Hauwa, both of them said was you cannot pit them against each other, and it has to come from a place of truth, kindness, and from a place of reality, right? So when we were growing up, I'm the eldest. And naturally, the tribal leadership needs to pass to my brother because he's the only son. It doesn't matter what number he's born on, he gets the leadership. But my father saw more potential in me. So my father would always say, oh, she will get the leadership. She will get the leadership. But he did it in a way where I was an ally to my brother. And I still am an ally to my brother. Us growing up, we didn't see each other as competition. We saw each other as allies. So if I were getting education, he was getting an education. If he had problems, I would solve them. If I had issues, he still solves them. He still supports the work that I do with girls' education in Afghanistan to a larger extent. And what does this show? This shows that when you have young boys being raised in families, don't pit them against the sister that they have to compete. It cannot be a competition. It has to be an allyship. And that allyship needs to be coming from a place of truth, honor, and kindness. You have to honor each other. You have to be respectful to each other. And you have to be kind to each other. There are going to be mistakes where my brother has made. There are mistakes that I made. But we honor each other's mistakes. We respect it and we move past that. And I think today, to a point where I'm speaking in my community, my brother is very much respectful of it and listens to it and make sure that other men are listening to it when they are not. So the best way towards a future, a feminist future is to ensure that the men don't see women as competitions, but are raised in spaces where we're each other's allies. Because again, we have to literally take the society further. We cannot be each other's competition. And that's where my focus is, and that's where my approach is. And the same examples like fathers charging their cell phones for their daughters, brothers getting internet for their sisters. It cannot be us against them. And when you study the history of Afghanistan for the past 3,000 years, all the tribal women who were leaders, all the women who were in leadership, all of them were supported by men in their lives. So, there's always this quote like, behind every successful man, there's a woman. But also behind every successful woman, there is also a father, a brother, or a husband who has supported them, And we need to recognize those. We need to celebrate those. And we need to see them through the lens of an ally, not an extraordinary thing. This is not extraordinary. This is allyship, and this is what should be normal. This is what should be practiced. Thank you.
Thank you, Pashtana. Hauwa, I wondered if you could take this question and respond, and that's with the rise of the "my country first" sort of philosophy, and leading to big reductions in overseas aid. How do you think this might impact women and girls, and how do we educate people about the impact of cutting aid to other countries?
Georgia, with due respect, it seems that Susan has her hands off. Do you mind if she says some few words before I answer?
Oh, thank
for
you.
sure.
No, I was just going to add that one of the things that we found in how Schools Shortchange Girls was that when fathers understood that their girls were maybe not getting the same level of instruction or the same level of opportunities, particularly in sports, they became allies. It's never too late to hope and expect that men can become allies. It's better if it starts when they're young, but it can start at any time.
Thank you. That's an important point. Thank you, Hauwa. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. The USAID and other funds that has been slowed down by the government of United States and elsewhere, I think has shaken a lot of things across a lot of borders. We know of HIV, and especially sub-Saharan Africa, that has been, gravely affected. And it affects children and women and girls for the most part. There are men, but that concentration from the statistic I was looking at is higher. And I believe that it's a wake-up call as well. So let us look at the flip side of this narrative. And let me re-echo what the former president said, the Kenyan president said, is it your money for us, the African countries? Did you work for it? So go work for your money, take care of your people, be responsible for your constituency. I understand that you said it was also a soft power things that was going through our countries. I think we could see a bigger picture of how American soft power is playing across the globe, which I think is a positive thing for everyone. But I think we should wake up from our slumber, people that are going hand in pocket with calabash begging, that please wake up, look for what belongs to you, hold on to it, and be who you want to be. Let me say something quickly about language, about feminism and womanism. Our immediate past director wrote a lot of books about feminism. I was trying to understand feminism and womanism. in some communities and some society across the globe, what matters. Me as a lawyer in court, I never use the word equality because I will fail and I will fail woefully. And so I use equal treatment under the law. So it's contextual. Let me say it again, context and context and context matter. We don't want you to leave listeners that we have one way of solving challenges. No, please put it within a bigger context of your work, what you are doing, and what you intend to do, especially our young listeners, that we have to understand context. And so womanism could be more relative to my context than feminism. And power and responsibility. Now, when you have power, you have more responsibility. Now, we could see it clearly in a global politics that is playing in a couple of wars that we are seeing. We have to demand, we cannot sit back to say community, we have to come together. We have to seek for responsibility for people we give power to. Pashtana was saying about vote earlier. I think it's a very important thing. But they don't, some of them don't care about your vote, in a way, because they think somebody have bought them over. So demand responsibility. In addition to your vote, I agree with you, Pashtana, demand responsibility. And finally, let me say something silly about when you break it, you fix it. So we have situations where, while we round up this panel, we are going, hopefully inspired by what our other colleagues have said, and we have shared in your Q&A and comments, that we are not only stronger, but we have ability to demand from them when they break our society, they fix it. If not so, we together use the soft power we have inside of us to soften the ground so that we can fix it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hauwa. I want to thank Hauwa, you, Pashtana, and Susan for joining in this important conversation today, and for all of those who have listened in this parallel event during the 2025 United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Thank you all for sharing your insights on advancing education for women and girls through research and innovation with those who have been listening, and highlighting some of the ways that our audience can take action to help make change. I want to also thank everyone who has been listening and attending our program today. As I mentioned in the beginning, a recording of this program will be posted on our website within the next week, and we will also be emailing a link to the recording to everyone who had registered for the program. And I want to just repeat something that really struck me, that Hauwa, that you said, that if I can be, you can be better. So thank you for that, and thank you all so much for all your contributions. And with that, we say thank you and goodbye.